About a month ago, when summer was just at its end, my friend Rose and I decided to go for a drive up to the mountains. I grew up nearly out of the city limits and drove the mountain roads often. Rose is a newer friend of my life and had only been up in the mountains a few times. I was eager to show her how cool it was at night, especially when you're headed back to town and you can see all the city lights as you're leaving the foothills. I love listening to creepy videos and watching scary movies, which may have been a big help for Rose and I on this particular night. We headed up in my van, a dependable '03 Toyota, who had made the journey with me dozens of times before. There's a part where the pavement ends and the gravel road takes you deeper into the mountain. Just beside this stretch of asphalt to gravel is a stretch of dirt that people use to park their trucks and trailers. Rose and I drove by and I noted that the pullout was empty, as was normal for this time of night. It was at 10 p.m. The sun had set, and the lights with timers had all turned on in town. I had never seen any lights up on the mountain though. Almost every farming field on the mountain is fenced off with a locked gate that will say private property, normally with bullet holes in the metal, to show that the owner is armed and will be pissed off if any idiots try to break into their fields. Every field on the mountain is watered with a center pivot irrigation system. Those are the long, repeatedly arched systems with metal frames and wheels that are commonly seen all over the United States agricultural districts. I've seen a few irrigation systems in town that have lights with timers on them, so at first, I wasn't too surprised when I saw one light in a field. We had only gone about a quarter mile by now, but then I remembered that not only had the light not been there before, but it was in the wrong place. Ah, crap, I sighed, which was probably not what Rose wanted to hear in the middle of her first nighttime mountain excursion. "What's up?" Rose asked. "Well, I know farmers are harvesting now, so I guess a light in the field makes sense, but at the same time, I've never seen that one before," I say, gesturing off to her right, where there is a very random amber light off at the edge of the field. It's dark enough that I can't see fences or any of the other boulders around it, but I was familiar enough with the mountains to know that it was the edge of the property. I started to tap on the wheel anxiously, as I was filled with mixed emotions. I was eager to keep going, because the mountains were going to be beautiful in the half moon, and Rose had never seen them at night before. At the same time, my brain told me that if I'm going to listen to a few dozen hours of horror stories per month, I would at least better get some meaning out of them. Crap, I'm sorry, Rose. I'd keep going if those were tractor headlights, but I've never seen just one light right there, especially in that field. I've never even seen it farmed, so it wouldn't make sense to waste energy or money lighting it. Rose is amazing and didn't mind that we were turning around only a quarter mile in. We turned and head back towards the asphalt. I had no idea why, but I felt like there was a clock that had suddenly started ticking. "Hey Rose, could you please hold the handle? I'm going to go fast enough that you might want something to hold on to. I promise that we're safe." Rose silently clutched the oh crap handle above the passenger side of the car and I went faster. I felt the sense that it was time to hurry up, and so I did. I zoomed back towards the asphalt as fast as I dared, my sense of trepidation only intensifying when we had reached the truck parking zone. There was a white truck and flatbed trailer that had not been there less than 10 minutes before. 5, maybe 6 guys were around the truck that had its headlights on. One guy was in a UTV, backing it off a flatbed trailer so fast that I thought he was going to crash into one of his friends. I raced by and somebody ran behind the car. I turned onto a road that would lead to a main road. Rose, I asked while inching my way up to 70 miles per hour. Were those people there when we drove by earlier? I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't crazy. Nope, Rose said evenly. I sighed, copying her tone, even as I jumped up to 75 miles per hour and glanced in my rearview mirror. As far as I could tell, they weren't following us, but we had 8 miles of straight, flat roads, with no cover before we actually managed to reach civilization. Did they seem like they were in a hurry to you? There was no other traffic, so we didn't have to slow down for anyone, which helped us both remain as calm as possible. Just a bit, she laughed nervously, looking over her shoulder to check for any cars as well. Thankfully, nobody came. We drove to a crowded restaurant and sat in the car while we calmed down. We tried to think of a reason why those guys had shown up so abruptly in the middle of the night. Rose suggested that maybe their friends were camping and in trouble. All of the land in the mountains are private property, so nobody camps there. I'm just glad Rose and I left so we didn't have to find out why 6 guys decided they needed to rush up the mountain in the middle of the night. A few weeks ago, a Labor Day weekend, my boyfriend and I made the journey to go see my grandparents, who lived in rural Arkansas. It's beautiful up there and we wanted to spend some time with them and go hiking, kayaking, etc. The trip was going normally until our second night there. A little background before I get into what happened. When we got there, my grandfather had mentioned something about a guy in his early 30s wandering around the road that they lived on, and how he had never seen him before. They live in a small town, if you want to even call it a town, so pretty much everyone knows everyone. Like I said, they are in rural Arkansas, in the middle of freaking nowhere. They live on a mountain, and technically it's a few hundred feet short of a mountain, but you get the idea. There's shoddy cell reception, like an hour-and-a-half drive from the nearest Walmart, and a ton of wild animals, not to mention difficult terrain. Okay, so on with the story. It was our second night there and we were all playing cards in their basement. The entrance to their house is on technically the second floor. That'll be important in a second. It's about 8:30, which is the equivalent to about 1 a.m. to my grandparents and the elderly people who live around them, when we had heard a knock on the door. My grandfather goes upstairs to answer the door, confused as to who is there that late. It's old people time. And all we hear is him say, "Didn't you just knock on my door?" Followed by some talking. He comes back downstairs and we ask who it was. He says that he doesn't know, but it looked like the guy who had been walking around in the woods a few days earlier. We asked him what he had wanted, and told us the man introduced himself with his full name, said that he was trying to get his life back on track. He was living with his mother up the hill. Where he said he was living was over an hour's walk up the mountain. It was getting dark and you don't want to wander around here at night, and he was just ringing doorbells. My grandfather said that he was shirtless and seemed a little bit off. We were all a little wary, and my boyfriend had mentioned something about burglars knocking on doors to see who is home so they can rob them. Seeing how a lot of people have vacation homes up here, we started getting nervous, but we continued playing cards. About 20 minutes later, my grandmother and I meet eyes. She looked at me and goes, "Do you hear talking?" I said I did, but it was probably the TV. She looked a little freaked out and told me that the TV wasn't on. My grandfather and boyfriend bolt up. My boyfriend goes outside, and my grandfather pulls a pistol out of literally nowhere and follows him. My grandmother and I just stared at each other and went upstairs to see if we could see anything out of the windows. They both come back, and a few minutes later, they say they couldn't find anyone. I'm freaking out at this point, and ask what the name he gave was so I could Google him. When I did, not one but 2 missing person reports came up about him within the past year. One of them was from last summer when he was filed as a missing person with his girlfriend and her kid. They ended up being found, but they didn't know where the crazy man was, but suspected that he was lying low because a police chase he had gotten in. The other one was from a few weeks ago, and his mother, who lives 4 hours away, not down the road like he said, had filed for him. My grandfather called the sheriff and they ended up finding him still shirtless, running through the woods in the dark. It could have ended up much worse, but luckily it didn't. Alright, so I'll try to keep the backstory as short as possible. A couple years ago, my living situation evaporated faster than I'd expected it to, and I had to pack all my possessions into my car and leave where I was living. There was going to be a short stretch of time where I had next to no money, certainly not enough for a week or two of $80 a night motel fees, a little over $100 all in. So I bought a cheap tent and other crappy camping equipment and some ramen. I decided that I would crash in the woods. That way I could leave my car full of my stuff and still have a place to sleep. I lived in a fairly forested area at the time, and since I grew up in the area and partied out in the woods a lot in high school, I know a decent amount of trails and discreet hiding places not far from said trails. So I brought my gear out to a very small mountain, and since it was going to rain that night, I hunted around for a nice place to set up. Being a mountain, I couldn't just find high ground, but I did find this a nice little plateau that projected a few hundred feet from the nearest slope before falling off, and by my best judgment, it seemed as safe a place as any. Well, it turns out my judgment sucks. Not only was the place right in the path of the rain, but all of the water from above had sluiced into an impromptu stream, which of course ran right through my tent. I woke up at maybe 2 a.m. to find my sleeping bag half immersed in water, and all of my possessions soaked through. Both my phone and flashlight were ruined, so I had no source of light. Despite the lack of illumination, I knew I had to get back to my car because I was freezing cold. Since my clothes were literally soaked through, I decided to leave them, and embarked wearing nothing but my boxers. My wallet was ruined too, so I didn't bring it. I quickly realized that I was not going to be able to find the trail, so I went back and took my machete so I could hack through the brush. Now most of you can probably see where things are going, but I would remind you that you are sitting someplace warm and reasonably safe. If you want to put yourself into my frame of mind, think of those cold winter days when you go outside, and your stream of consciousness transforms from normal thoughts into an endless stream of, crap, it's cold, and add a bunch of your possessions being ruined into the mix. So I faced the general direction of my car and I just started walking, angrily chopping at anything that happened to block my path. Eventually, after much effort, I see an end to the tree line ahead of me. I walk on and realize that I'm in somebody's backyard. And worse, however, is the fact that said backyard has a screened-in porch with a small table lamp, and standing on that porch is a woman smoking a cigarette. Now really picture this scene in your head. You can click my profile if you want to see what I look like. Now imagine that image soaking wet, walking into your backyard half naked, and enraged, swinging a machete around like a madman. The porch lights went off, and I immediately went into I'm definitely going to get arrested mode. I hustled out to the street and ran towards my car, and then spent the next hour huddled in a ball on the seat, just waiting for the flashing blue lights to come behind me. They never did, however. I have no idea what that woman thought when she saw me, but it can't have been good. I would almost want to go over there and apologize for scaring her, but I'm guessing she doesn't want to meet me. I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington near Mount Rainier. Like, not an official campground, just way out in the forest where I wouldn't have expected another human for miles. One night, I wake up and I hear something. I open my tent, and there is a guy sitting by where my fire had been, right outside of my tent. Nothing is really noteworthy about the guy, just a fairly regular looking dude, just sitting there a couple feet from my tent. No bag or pack or anything with him, just a guy. He saw me open the tent and his eyes got huge, like he had just seen a ghost, and he took off sprinting. It shook me up pretty badly, but over the next day, I managed to put it out of my mind fairly well, after writing it off as just some odd occurrence and a guy that was probably high or something, and he had somehow managed to set up a camp coincidentally not far from mine. And then 2 days after that, and about 10 to 15 miles away, in totally random directions that nobody could take the same path as on accident, I was sitting by the fire that night and started hearing noises that I got more and more convinced were a person. I called out to them, and out of the darkness, someone was like, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I said no. "I don't even think that's a real place here." They kept talking from just out of my line of vision. I tried to see them with my flashlight, but they yelled, "Aim that way," and kind of spooked and not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person, I did just that. After like 15 minutes of me being very freaked out, and them talking and asking completely random questions from the darkness, it sounded like the voice had gotten closer, so I shined my light that way again. It was the same dude who had been outside my tent 2 nights before. He had to have followed me almost 15 miles over 2 days, because there is no way he could have just accidentally wound up in the same spot as vast as that wilderness is. There's no possible way. As soon as my light hit him, he took off again. I started to chase him but didn't want to get lost in the wilderness in the dark, so I stopped quickly after probably about 100 to 200 feet. This one couldn't be written off, because the only way he could have been in both places is specifically if he was following me. I decided the trip was very over first thing in the morning, and I hiked back out over 3 days, constantly doubling back, trying to throw anyone following off my trail, and occasionally hiding and waiting to see if he would come by following me. I really can't describe how terrifying it was to feel like I was being hunted through the woods, and to actually have to brainstorm on things I could do to best avoid potentially being murdered. On the first night of hiking out, twice I heard what sounded like a person walking circles around my tent, but by the time I had mustered up the courage to look, nobody was there. On the second night, I heard what I thought was an animal making noises at first in the distance, but slowly decided that it sounded more like a human making animal calls, but could have actually been an animal. But I didn't actually see the guy again, but it really did sound like a person making howling noises. I literally almost cried when I finally got back to my car. The relief was so strong. To this day, it's probably the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I have no idea who the guy was or what his intentions were, and no way of getting an explanation, but I really can't articulate just what a terrifying few days it was.